Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Lando Norris is considered by some to be next year's F1 title favourite, but he needs to improve in certain areas if he wants to take down Max Verstappen and his rivals going into next season. Lando, it seems, finally realises this after controversial comments back at the Brazilian Grand Prix about the luck rather than talent that helped Verstappen over the line in the World Championship that weekend. Lando now recognises he has a long way to go if he wants to be on Max's level next year. If the McLaren's good enough, that may not matter, but the argument might well be that Lando is not as well positioned as he could be going into next season. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, Daniel Ricciardo, former teammate to Lando Norris, was rumoured the other day to potentially be getting involved, at least from the Cadillac side, in their General Motors Formula 1 project. 2026, we will have 11 teams on the grid, 22 cars. We're pretty sure that Cadillac will go for a driver like Colton Herta, pretty young, exciting, talented driver, American, of course, part of the Andretti program over there in IndyCar, I believe, a name that's been involved in potentially getting into Formula 1 over the last couple of years with AlphaTauri. He seems not nailed on, but a decent chance indeed for that seat. Of course, you would expect the other driver, assuming it is Herta, to be someone with more experience, right? And therefore, Ricciardo, Bottas, these types of names, Magnussen, for example, have been thrown around. And it seems that Cadillac General Motors interested in Ricciardo, but apparently Ricciardo, hasn't really got interest the other way. So even if there is discussions from General Motors, Ricciardo maybe isn't so keen to return to the sport, and certainly not return to the sport with a team that is probably not going to be winning championships or winning races at the end of the day. He did his time at RB this season, didn't go to plan. A return to Formula 1 for a Cadillac team that are not going to be front runners seems pretty unlikely. There was as well confirmation, it was noted today on the UK Companies House, that Andretti Racing Limited has been renamed to Cadillac Formula Racing Limited. So it's very fascinating exactly the reasons why the Andretti name is getting erased effectively for many of these programs. It seems to be Formula 1 management, grudges, I don't know. But that was confirmed today, so just goes to show that things are moving along relatively swiftly. Couple of driver market things today. Alpine and Flavio Briatore have been talking about their decisions. We know that Sainz was potentially getting involved in the project. It never seemed especially likely, but Sainz to Alpine, especially when there was talk on the Mercedes engines that they were going to be using, there was potentially some promise there. But Briatore says, I spoke with Sainz, he was interesting for us, but only for 4 years, which is kind of remarkable to think about, that Briatore would have wanted to sign him until like 2028, right? To sign him for the 25, 6, 7, and 8 seasons. Maybe a 2+2 or some sort of deal. But yeah, Alpine are basically saying, we don't want Sainz for 2 years or 1 year. We'd want a driver like that for the long haul, which I guess is fair enough, but still, the idea of asking a driver to commit to a project, especially a driver of Sainz's talent, to commit to a project like Alpine, which is, you never know what you're going to get from an organisation like Alpine for 4 years, was clearly too much to commit to. So I think probably on both sides here, it didn't really make sense. Briatore, though, also mentioned that Colapinto was on the radar, maybe still is on the radar, but Briatore says, look, it's obviously Gasly and it's Aaron, their reserve driver, so they didn't really say anything about Colapinto. But James Vowles says, and maybe this is just good marketing business, whatever you want to say from Vowles, trying to rep his guy, says there's still interest because, look, Williams would like to rent out Colapinto, really, to another team for next year. Maybe a team like RB could be an option. Then get him back, he's a better driver. And of course, Red Bull wouldn't want to do that because, they're just training up a driver for another team. And this seemed to be maybe at a standstill quite a few rounds ago. And then over the last few rounds, Colapinto has been, relatively speaking, underwhelming compared to his debut. Crashes here and there, not as fast as Albon, stuff like this. But Val says there's still interest. I can't imagine there's interest really from anywhere outside of Racing Bulls, because they are going to put Lawson or Tsunoda in the Red Bull, we believe. Therefore, they're going to have to put someone into the Racing Bull. We think it's going to be Isaac Hadjar, but there is an argument to say that Colapinto could be a better driver than Hadjar, but I think that's probably what Red Bull are going to do at this point. Ferrari and McLaren, they fought it out for the Constructors' Championship. I think the McLaren setup is kind of interesting, isn't it? I didn't really mention this at the time. This is a picture taken before the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix finale. We have Fred Vasseur, team principal of Ferrari, shaking hands with team principal of McLaren? No, that's Zak Brown, CEO. So I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing, but it is interesting, the dynamic at that team, isn't it? Because Fred Vasseur, is the top man, that's how it is. But no, in McLaren's case, you have the CEO in Zak Brown, and then you have Andrea Stella, who's technically the man in charge, the team principal, but yet he's not, as in situations like this, when it comes to a public-facing member, Zak is your man. And look, I'm sure he wants to be. He wants to be the face of the success, fair enough. But I did think this was an interesting picture, isn't it, really? Because this is not like Toto and Christian. This is guys in technically different roles, but are both representing their team. But here are the guys on McLaren. Of course, we're going to talk about the FIA Awards show from last night. Here was the Constructors' Championship winners of the year. Pretty sure Mr. MBS, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, was on the left-hand side here, but they cropped him out of the shot. I can't imagine that he was too happy with that one. We also got this kind of Photoshop job when they put together like just a few second video on Lewis Hamilton, then they did like a bit of a graphic switch to Ferrari. Now, this isn't a real picture, it's Photoshop, doesn't look great. But still, Hamilton, the Scuderia, was mentioned at the gala last night for the FIA. And here's Max Verstappen doing his community service. So they were doing the gala in Rwanda. So everyone was out there and they decided, all right, Max, you can do your community service that you got for swearing a couple of weeks ago now. Obviously at this moment. So here he looks relatively content. This one he's like, do I really have to be here? But yeah, he's doing some nice things. And this is the thing about the FIA. There are some good people that work there. They do have a positive impact on motorsport in some regards. But it's just in general such a shambles, as we discussed yesterday and over the last few days, that it just is never going to get a good rep. Neither from Max either. I can't imagine that he's happy having to do this because he swore, but he was probably going like, look, probably was a good thing to do for the motorsport community at the end of the day. But the fact that Max had to do it because he swore in a press conference, and Charles also swore but didn't have to do it because he apologized, it's just such a mess. And I don't really know why Ben Sulayem still insists on clamping down on this type of stuff. The Grand Prix Drivers Association made their thoughts very clear indeed. But yeah, here's Max talking to some of these kids, and I think at the start of the video as well, we see a picture of Max and Ben Sulayem hugging it out a bit. And I think you can tell by Max's face here when he hugs him, he's like, yeah, I don't think they're the best of friends. Let's put it clearly like that. We also saw this yesterday. I'm pretty sure this is fan voted, so take it with a grain of salt. But I don't know how this one, I mean, okay, it's fan voted, so I know how it won the vote. But still, the Action of the Year award for the FIA. So typically this is like an overtake. Obviously, you guys remember, what was it, Albon's overtake in Canada when he, like in the wet conditions, sent it down the inside of two cars onto the final chicane where the Wall of Champions is. That was the overtake of the year, as far as I'm concerned. Finding the gap somehow, splitting the, the eye of the needle or whatever, with Albon making that move. Perez, I mean, look, it was a nice move. It was in the sprint race back at China. Alonso and Sainz are having a bit of a bicker, and he does pull off a through goes Hamilton-esque move. And the through goes Hamilton thing from Silverstone 2022 was legendary, but it was legendary for multiple reasons, right? I mean, it was obviously a year after everything that happened in 2021. The car wasn't as good. It was Hamilton at his home Grand Prix in the actual Grand Prix, whereas this was a sprint race, in China, and it was a nice overtake from Perez, sure, but it was not even close to some of the other things we saw this year, in my opinion. But here's Max Verstappen with his fourth consecutive victory of the World Drivers' Championship, turning up in his trademark, jacket here and bow tie. I think he's worn this same bow tie for the last, every single gala anyway, for the last few years. And the fit works well on him. He can focus more so on winning championships than choosing a new bow tie every year. But this is not Charles Leclerc's real account, by the way. This is like a burner account that somebody runs. But, he does say that trophy will be mine in 2025. Of course, every driver that is at Max wants it to be their trophy in 2025. And of course, this was the image of your top three drivers of the season. Leclerc didn't quite beat Lando to the punch in terms of second. We don't know what his bonus would have been if he'd have got second in the Drivers' Championship for Leclerc. It probably would have been in the order of millions of dollars. So, he can't be too mad. And obviously, he wasn't able to win because because Max won it a couple of rounds ago now, and really, Max won it in Brazil, because until Brazil, it was getting a bit sketchy for Max. I know there were some people out there that said there was never really a title fight, Lando was never a serious contender, and I know what they mean. But the title fight was on, and Brazil looked like it was going to be pretty good. The sprint went in McLaren's hands, then Verstappen qualifies way down the order, Lando's right at the front. That was an opportunity to eat into the lead considerably, not able to achieve exactly that. Now, after the Grand Prix, of course, there was a lot of controversy because Lando made the comments at the time about the fact that it was, well, luck-induced, not skill-induced, why Verstappen won the Grand Prix. Skill or talent, whatever you want to say. Now, look, this comment from Lando, he feels like was taken out of context, and I understand why he feels that way, because he was referring to the Verstappen kind of race victory in general with an air of, given the red flag, obviously Verstappen was helped because the red flag happened, he could change the tyres, and then he was all good to go from there to the end of the Grand Prix, get Ocon, and the rest of the race is over from there. So yeah, there was some luck on Verstappen's part, but of course, he earns the luck by driving as he did through the field up until that point, and to be honest, he made the right call. Red Bull made the right call. It seemed pretty obvious to many of us this race was going to get red flagged. When it did, a change of tyres was an option for Verstappen for free. The other teams jumped the gun, and I think honestly that weekend it was interesting because McLaren, I think they were trying to fight Russell and the Mercedes rather than being aware that really that wasn't so much their race. They needed to make sure they covered Max Verstappen. They didn't, and the rest is history. And obviously Norris and the other drivers know that this was one of the greatest ever wins for Max, and obviously the talent on display that weekend in tricky conditions was mesmerizingly impressive, but after the race, Lando, I don't think, did himself too many favors. Of course, Lando's going to say, oh, the media manipulated this comment into implying that I was talking about Max in general rather than just that specific circumstance with the red flag, but if you listen to the quote, I feel like there was a bit of both there. Yes, he's talking about the red flag, but you know, he's also, I think, talking a bit more generally just because he's frustrated. So I'll share this clip, and then I'll share what Lando had to say last night to say, look, Max, my bad. I know you drove very well. I retract that statement. I know that I've got more that I need to do.
It shouldn't have been red flagged, but obviously that was the crash in the end which caused the red, so just that's life sometimes. You take a gamble, it's paid off for them. It's not talent or, you know, it's just luck. So first of all, I retract that comment back there where I said it was all luck, no talent. You know how the media change things, but first of all, congratulations to Max. What he did this year, what he did in Brazil, of course, was incredible. So I'm the first one to acknowledge such a thing when I'm the one going up against him.
So, of course, this was a big controversy at the time when Max went on to win the Grand Prix. Lando, of course, after the restart, wasn't having the best time, and this was pretty much an image that in some sense summed up the championship with, Lando out of the running, out of the picture at the end of this lap, effectively in Brazil. And obviously people are also saying, oh yeah, what are you saying, Lando? All luck, no talent. And, well, Lando's lap 1 conversions weren't the best. I do find it interesting how after Lando lost the championship and Max was the champion, his starts got way better. Like, since Max was crowned champion in Las Vegas, since then, Norris has been, he was on pole a good couple of times, and both times he had a great start. So there does seem to be something in there where, like, once the pressure was off Lando and the championship was concluded, then, he seemed to deliver a little bit better than he did otherwise. Or he's just getting better and is learning more and learning fast. And this season was a strange one in many respects because it started looking like McLaren had no hope to fight for really anything, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Norris is maybe in a title fight, as are McLaren. So Norris retracts the statement and says, yeah, I didn't intend it to be said in that way. I want to admit, Lando, that he obviously has more room to go, and as John Noble says, I know I need to step up and do more. Retract the comment. Congrats to what Max did. I'm the first one to acknowledge such a thing when going up against him, right? So, that's what Lando had to say on the day. He recognises that he's got to do more in terms of beating Max, and I think every driver on some level goes through this where they look at the top guy winning in the top car and they say, well, if I was in that car, I would execute very easily as well. But I think Lando's understood this year there is far more to championship success and consistent championship success and race wins than just executing in the fastest car. First of all, you've got to do that. When you've got the fastest car on the weekends, you've got to execute every session and then capitalise in the Grand Prix without making any mistakes. That ain't easy to do. And on the weekends where you don't have the fastest car, still maximising points as Max did on the majority of weekends this year, that is the key difference maker, that there are only a few drivers on the grid experienced enough to really have lived this and be able to execute on it. Lando didn't have the experience, now arguably does have the experience and maybe the maturity as well to improve as he needs to. Because as I've said before, Lando's got the pace, qualifying, race trim, no questions on that in my mind. It's the other factors, the mentality, racecraft maybe at times, decision making I would say in critical moments, and just execution when it comes to, you know, pressure moments like race starts and stuff where Lando has let himself down often this season and even times last season as well. I think the more that time goes past, the better prepared Lando's going to be, but I still feel like if Lando is going to win next year's championship, he's going to have some sort of a car advantage over Verstappen and maybe a couple of other ones as well. So what do you guys expect Lando to do? Because many people are raising the question right now, who is the next World Drivers' Champion? By that, I don't mean who's going to win it next year. I really mean who's the next new World Drivers' Champion. Both questions are interesting because, you know, Verstappen could win it again next year. Hamilton could win it next year. Alonso could, maybe Alonso could win it in 2026 if Newey cooks up another rocket ship for Aston Martin. But the point really being, you know, who's going to be the next driver to get over the line? I think it's going to be Leclerc. My feeling is that Leclerc is the most complete, the fastest, with the ability to execute, but it depends on Ferrari at the end of the day. However good the driver is, they are always going to be limited by the performance of the car, and we know that Max, we know how good Max is. We saw it in Brazil. Lando saw it in Brazil as well, firsthand at times, but he still didn't win a race this year for 10 rounds in a row when the car just wasn't good enough to compete. So, you know, there's only so much that Leclerc, Hamilton could do if next year's Ferrari isn't up to scratch, and obviously Lando will need to hope for the same thing from the McLaren if he's trying to execute for next season. Just quickly on Red Bull, a couple of comments from Juan Pablo Montoya today on Perez, and his opinion, you know, he's a pretty ruthless guy, is as follows. I think that Yuki would be the automatic choice for the senior Red Bull team. Yuki for maturity with the team. I agree. I'd like to see it as well. I don't think they're going to do it. But Horner actually made this very clear. So he was kind of asked the question, look, if you are going to replace Perez, which obviously you're not because he's got a contract, but let's be honest, they probably are. What are you going to do? Who are the replacements going to be? That type of stuff. And Horner says Tsunoda and Lawson would be the candidates. Kind of saying, oh, well, they're not the candidates because we're not going to get rid of Perez. But, you know, let's be honest here, that seems pretty likely despite the contract they have. So Horner confirms these are the two guys in the running, basically. But time will tell what they actually go on to decide to do, and whoever they put in the car, can they deliver a better performance in this? I thought it was pretty brutal, really. Like, they've got Perez smiling, so I guess that's one positive for him to take. But yeah, race head-to-head, quali head-to-head, it's not been pretty. I think quali head-to-head, it was, what, Baku, where Perez beat Max, and then still managed to lose to him in the Grand Prix because he crashed out at the end of the race with Sainz. That wasn't ideal. I think it's also the first time in a long time where maybe there's only been a couple of times since the turn of the century, turn of the millennia, where a teammate has won the world championship and his teammate has scored 0 pole positions. It's pretty rarely done recently. Usually, if a car is good enough to win the championship, then, you know, the teammate will have put it on pole at least a couple of times. Not the case this year. And of all of these terrible statistics, the most damning is probably the points scored, to be honest, because that is just very ugly given the circumstances. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.